Justice Lab. I am your host, Dr. Leslie Joseph. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode. I'm so glad you're here. We are still talking about food apartheid. And in the last episode, I kind of gave an overview of what it was. We kind of talked about how it could look and what it means for it to exist in the world. And I promised that on part 2, I would give you examples of food apartheid, specific ways that we see it operating in the US and throughout the world. And so there was so much to get into, I couldn't just do a second part. So this second part will be just talking about food apartheid in the United States specifically. That's where I live, that's where I'm from, that's what I'm familiar with, and I see it happening all around me. And so I want to talk about it on this episode today. And in part 3, there's gonna be 3 parts to this. We will talk about food apartheid around the world, because it's not just in America. It's not just in developed countries. Developing nations, other parts of the world also experience food apartheid. So I want to get into all of that stuff. I don't want to leave anything on the table. So this episode, we're talking about food apartheid in the United States, how it looks, what the results have been, and what we need to do to really confront and address these issues, because they're important issues that affect all aspects of life. And to have a food apartheid system in place in a developed country where we are claiming to be a place that's free, that has liberty for everyone, a place where everybody is supposed to have equal access, equal opportunity to be whatever they want to be. Living in a place where there's food apartheid running rampant prevents that. And it keeps this country and any other country from maximizing all it can be, because when any of us are struggling, when any of us don't have what we need, we all lose out on what you can offer and what contributions you can make. And so on this episode today, we are talking about the specific ways that food apartheid shows up in the United States. Stay tuned. This is the Environmental Justice Lab. Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab. I'm Dr. Joseph, and we are talking about food apartheid in the United States. We're talking about how it shows up and what it does in the United States. And it won't take you long to drive around a city, to drive around the outskirts of a town, to see food apartheid in action, to see where the supermarkets stop and where the convenience stores begin, and where the dollar stores are located, and where the Dollar Trees and 99-cent stores are found, where you start getting fast food restaurants instead of full service restaurants. You can drive around, it won't take you long, and you'll know right away that we have 2 systems of food in our country, 2 approaches to providing the food that we need. And so I'm calling, and most food activists and advocates are calling these systems and these disparities food apartheid. Like I said last time, we're going beyond the idea of a food desert. We're leaving behind the idea that there's just simply insecurity surrounding food present in these communities. And we're actually working to identify what specifically is taking place to create these types of food environments. And it's clear to me, it's clear from the research, it's clear from the practice that food apartheid is what is going on all across this country. I listed 3 specific examples of food apartheid in the US. I'm sure there's more. And as you listen to this, think through it, and I'm sure you can identify other ways it shows up. I got 3 for you today. Thinking about food apartheid, how we get food, how food arrives, and how it's produced. I got 3 ways that food apartheid is present in the United States. Number 1, the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture. There have been multiple reports, multiple investigations into the ways in which the United States Department of Agriculture distributes its funding, how it subsidizes farming, and how it supports farmers as they work to produce the food that we need. And so I got a couple of facts here I wrote down in a 1994 report that the USDA actually did on itself. This wasn't an outside group. This was them looking internally at their processes, at their programs, and evaluating how money is distributed and where it goes. They determined from their own investigation that minority farmers receive less than their fair share of money from the USDA when it comes to crops, when it comes to disaster payments, when it comes to loans and subsidies. If you were a black farmer, if you were a minority farmer in the US working with the USDA, you didn't get what the white farmers got. It's just the fact. The research, the review in their report says it very clearly. Here's some of the facts they lay out. They say that the largest 1% of loans that the USDA gave out, so the biggest ones, all went to white male farmers and their farms. They also found that on average, the loans given out to black farmers were worth 25% less than those given to white farmers. Just think about that. So just in general, just the loan amounts are just lower. And there's no reason for them to be lower. There's nothing unique about these farms that would require you to shift the way you make payments and provide loan support to these farmers. It was purely because of race, purely discrimination. That is the reason why. And that's the only reason why that was the case. Another fact, 97% of disaster payments went to white farmers, while less than 1% went to black farmers. Think about that. A hurricane comes through, a drought happens, you can't produce crops, you can't support your family. The USDA is there to help. They're there to provide disaster assistance to keep you afloat as you rebuild and re-establish your farm. But their own report said that 97% of the payments for disasters went to white farmers, and less than 1% went to black farmers. This is what observers and investigators are calling a legacy of discrimination. It isn't just a one-time thing. It isn't a one-shot deal. This is a situation where the USDA has a long-standing, long-term approach that is infused with discrimination, that's infused with racism, that seeks to ensure that white farmers, no matter what size their farm is, that they have whatever they need, whatever is required to continue, while black farmers are left to fend for themselves, even as they operate within the systems that the USDA puts in place in order to support farming and food production. It's a legacy of discrimination, and it's happening in the United States. The black farmers sued. They settled. I think there was a big payment that went out. But even now, decades later, the same issues are present. Farm subsidies, disaster relief, loans, all of these things are still disproportionately provided to white farmers instead of black farmers, regardless of the size, regardless of the need that each of those farmers would have. This is the legacy of the USDA. Now, I'm not as plugged in to agriculture and farming as I'm sure a lot of you are listening, but I can tell that this is not the way to manage a food system in a country. And it's going to lead to impacts down the line that reduce and restrict what's available to the people who need it the most. And so we can't continue to allow this legacy to continue without calling it out, without confronting it directly, and without ensuring that it's well known that this is the way this agency is operating. We can't do that. And so that's my first one, the USDA. The second one, which always seems to be popping up when we talk about any kind of justice issue, is prison labor. Prison labor. So apparently, you can't sell products and goods across state lines that were produced by prison labor. You're not allowed to make products using prison labor and then sell it to other states, other countries. You can't ship it out. It's against the law in the United States, except for this one instance where they carved out a loophole to allow food companies to do it, to allow food and agriculture businesses to use prison labor to process and produce their food so they can ship it out all over the world. And so now we have these huge ag companies, these huge food companies using prison labor. Now, mind you, we're talking about prison labor. So these prisoners aren't getting paid. If they are, it's very little. It's way below minimum wage. They have no worker protection when you're working as a prisoner in a prison, right? So you're in the fields picking, and you're in factories processing, and you're packaging and doing all this work for little or no pay with no legal protection because you're incarcerated. And these companies can use that labor to produce what they make and send it everywhere and take advantage of the fact that they can use laborers that aren't getting paid anything to produce their products. And now you can suppress the price of those products. You can produce whatever you think would sell quickly. And so all this processed food, all these unhealthy items that you are trying to promote are more readily available because of how low it costs to produce them, because you're using prison labor to produce them. And on top of that, you're exploiting a population of people who we all know is disproportionately Black people, Hispanic people, people of color. You're exploiting them because our criminal justice system is more criminal than just. It's unfortunate but true. And as a result, we have a disproportionate number of people of color in prison. And now you have these companies coming in and using them as their labor. They're not hiring regular factory workers out here outside of prisons, people who are looking for jobs, people who are concerned that jobs are not available. We're not hiring them. We're hiring prison labor because it's cheap, it's always there, and it allows me to make my products at such a low price that I can do whatever I want as a large corporation. And so not only are you exploiting the prisoners and their labor and their hard work, you're also shipping out the kind of food that we really shouldn't be eating. It's not healthy for us. It's not worth our money to buy these types of foods, these high fat, full of sodium, this candy, high sugar stuff that is going to just harm us physically. You're producing it in mass quantities using prison labor. And so it creates an apartheid system. In this case, It's on the food production side and the labor side, you're creating this two-tier system because clearly, if you had to hire a regular employee, it would cost you more. You'd have to provide a minimum wage. You'd have to provide insurance, workers' compensation, all types of protection to ensure that that worker would be able to do the job. But if you go to a prison and use those workers instead, all that goes out the window. And so it's a big problem. It's a big problem. And so that's my second one. Prison labor. We got the USDA with their legacy of discrimination. We got prison labor with the exploitation of people incarcerated and the suppression of food pricing and the mass production of these awful foods that we're eating all around us. And the third thing I got for you in the United States is supermarket redlining. Now, you might not be familiar with that term. You might have heard of redlining as it relates to housing and living conditions way back pre-civil rights, where people were barred from living in certain parts of a city, and those areas were redlined, and only Black people could live there because they couldn't get loans to live anywhere else. So they were relegated to these parts of the town. That's housing redlining. But now we have supermarket redlining, right? And supermarket redlining is when you have these large supermarkets, these large grocery stores who are uninterested in having their stores in inner city areas, urban areas, in low-income neighborhoods and communities of color, all these places where there's a need for that food. These large supermarket chains don't want to be there. And instead, they want to put their stores in the more affluent, wealthier, wider areas of a town and service the people that live there, out in the suburbs, out in some of these gentrified areas. You push people out, you bring in these nice, fancy, high-end markets and grocery stores to service the influx of typically white, affluent people who are living there. And so it's important to recognize that it's not a coincidence that when you drive around a community of color, a Black neighborhood, a Hispanic neighborhood, that you don't find a large supermarket there. You don't find a healthy food store there. It's not a coincidence. These are decisions that are being made at every level, at the business level, on the city planning level, on the state level, to try and ensure that access to these foods, these places, are specific to certain parts of a city or certain parts of a state. It is not a coincidence, and it's not just a result of market dynamics or free market activity. It is an intentional, deliberate disinvestment from these communities, a deliberate and intentional disinvestment from the people who live in those communities who would love to come to your store and go grocery shopping and provide for their families. But it's a deliberate disinvestment from those areas. And we're calling it supermarket redlining. We're calling it food apartheid. That's what we're calling it. That's what it is. Because there's no other reason to not put your store there. Because people are going to shop there, people are going to eat there, people are going to purchase the food because they need it to eat and to survive. And so why not? The only reason you would avoid those areas is because of your view of the people that live there, your view of what you believe would happen to your store if you placed it there, your view of the ways in which that community is developing and growing and thriving even. That's what's driving your decision making. So when you come to, for instance, the northeast side of Columbia, where I do a lot of teaching, where I go to church, where a lot of our friends are, and you have to drive miles and miles and miles to find one store, one supermarket, it's only because you don't want to put your store there. It's only because you believe the people who live there aren't worth having the kind of support that your store could offer. Because they're shopping at the food line. They're shopping at the food line and the Piggly Wiggly and whatever else is near them. They're going there and buying food and bringing it home. They're going to Walmart. But you don't want to put your store there because of your view of the people that live there. It's food apartheid. It's discrimination. It's racism. It's all those things. Xenophobia. All those things are playing into your decision making as a supermarket chain as to why you are not investing in these areas with your stores. That's just what it is. And I've read a few things that talk about how, well, finding the space is challenging. Having to purchase multiple lots to have one big store is not usually available. The people there wouldn't be able to afford the kind of food that would be available to them in those stores. The development in these areas are keeping a lot of people out because they don't see the future of the area and they don't see growth in a way that would sustain their store there. And so many reasons to not do something. Whereas when I see a new complex, a new development popping up in some suburb somewhere, the plans are already laid for a supermarket, for a plaza, for all these stores to come and serve people who haven't even gotten there yet. Meanwhile, we live in places and we see areas where people have been there for hundreds of years and have no access to the food that they need. No opportunity to get what they want. Just nothing. Nothing at all. It's supermarket redlining. It's food apartheid. And it's harmful. Let's talk about that. So what are the results? What happens in the US when food apartheid runs rampant? When we see what we see, what happens? Well, guess what? The first thing that happens is you get a bunch of food swamps. If you remember from last episode, a food swamp is an area that is just overrun with convenience stores, overrun with unhealthy food options. You see them, so many of them in Black neighborhoods, so many of them in communities of color, and very few of them, if any, in white neighborhoods, no matter what income level you have. From the trailer park to the rich suburb, you don't see food swamps as much in white neighborhoods. Why is that? It's because of your view of the people that live there. Because guess what? We all need to eat. We're all going to buy food, and we're all going to make something for our families to support them. With the absence of a supermarket, the absence of a grocery store that's healthy, these unhealthy places just flood the block. Gas stations and convenience stores flood the area. Dollar stores, Dollar Trees, Dollar General, Family Dollar, so many dollar stores all over. They flood the area. Fast food places flood the area. All of these places are just swarming in these communities that are devoid of healthy food options because they know that you're going to need to eat something. You're going to have to buy something. And so let's send the store your way. Let's build some stores your way where the food is cheap, unhealthy, and harmful. And you'll eat it because you have no other choice. You have no place to go to get healthy food. You don't have access to either a supermarket or even transportation to get to a supermarket. So you're going to the pharmacy to get your milk and bread and cheese and snacks and cereal and milk. You're going to that convenience store that calls itself a grocery store, that calls itself a fresh market. It's not. It's not. That's all you have. All you have are big bags of chips, sugary cereals, and milk. And if you're lucky, you might find a banana or two, maybe an orange. Nothing else. You live in a food swamp because of this food apartheid system. It's the system that created this environment. This is not a coincidence. It didn't happen on its own. Decisions are being made, and city planners are planning their cities in ways that facilitate this two-tiered system of food quality and food access. That's what happened. That's the result of food apartheid. Another result is just bad health. You're just sick, right? You have poor health outcomes. You're overweight, diabetes, heart disease, asthma, cardiovascular illness. All this stuff happens because you live in a place where you can't get the food that you need and your body is not able to manage because it's lacking, right? You live in an area with overweight people who are malnourished. Think about that for a second. You think about malnourished as not having food at all and being really skinny and emaciated, and we can see your ribs, and that's not how malnourishment goes in the developed world. Here, you're malnourished because you don't have the nutrients that you need for your body to grow and develop in a healthy way. And so, although you're eating whatever's around you, your body doesn't have what it needs. It's not getting it from the food. It's malnourished. You don't have it. And so you're tired. You're fatigued constantly. You weigh more than you should. You have trouble breathing, trouble doing regular activities. And that's just from the food. That's not even including the total environment. This is an environmental justice issue, right? It's environmental apartheid. That's the big umbrella we're operating under with this food apartheid thing. It's the whole environment that's harming and challenging your ability to be successful in whatever you're trying to do. So there's poor health outcomes from this food apartheid system that operates. You know, one statistic I heard, I'm in Columbia, South Carolina right now, and there is a neighborhood in the northeastern part of Columbia. And every time we talk about food, I'm always reminded that this area in northeast Columbia, South Carolina, has the highest rate of diabetic amputations in the country. The whole country, in this one area in Columbia. Why is that? Why is that? It's because of the lack of healthy, affordable food in the area. It's not because the people living there don't know how to eat healthy. It's not because they're uneducated about how to prepare food properly and have balanced meals. It's not even because they're low income. It's because there's no access. There's nothing available for them to eat that's healthy. And so you have poor health outcomes as a result of this system. It needs to stop. Another issue, another result, is that people start to look down on where you're from. Like, why would I live there? There's no place to eat. There's nothing to do. Everyone here seems to be in a different mind state. What's going on in this neighborhood? Well, what's going on is we're not healthy. We're not whole. We're not able to do the things we want to do because we don't have the resources. And it starts with food. When I go home to eat, what am I eating? When I'm hungry, where am I going? When my family of 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 want to make a family meal, what are we going to do? Are we going to go to a nice supermarket, buy the ingredients, buy them in bulk, come home and cook them, prepare them, and have a good meal? Or are we going to go to the nearest fast food chicken place and get their family meal of fried chicken, potatoes and gravy, green beans, and random vegetables that have been cooked in grease all day long, and eat that for dinner. I've done that before. I've gone to different places, and growing up, we had to eat fried chicken 2-piece dinners that were completely unhealthy and that wouldn't contribute to any development that I'm trying to have. But that's all that's available. That's all we have. I remember when we had a grocery store right down the street from our house and it shut down. It was right across the street from the high school. It was right in the middle of all of the school district buildings, and it was gone. We had to drive another 10 minutes to get some food growing up. I was fortunate that we could do that. A lot of people can't. And so what kind of neighborhood are we living in when we can't get food to support ourselves and to feed our families? Do I want to live there? Do I want you to come live where I... No, you're trying to get out. And as you get out, the quality of the neighborhood goes down even further because we need you to be there. And so food apartheid hits every aspect of life wherever you live. And food apartheid damages all that you can imagine would be good and healthy about where you're from. And so we need to do something. We need to say something. We need to acknowledge and evaluate the realities around us when it comes to food. And I'm glad there's people doing it. I'm glad there's a lot of people on the ground bringing attention to this issue of food, talking about food, talking about the ways in which the lack of it harms not just people, but families and communities and businesses and the economy. It's a big problem. And so that's all I got for you today. I'm trying to watch my tone. I'm trying to be respectful. But this is unacceptable. This idea that because of your skin color or because of your potential location or because of your income level, you can't provide healthy food for your family. It's just inexcusable. And the fact that we would have actors and people in our society who would perpetuate these systems, who would not only use these discriminatory practices, but advance them and amplify them for their own benefit, it's just appalling. We shouldn't be doing that. We shouldn't live in this type of a society. This is a developed country. This is what people keep telling me is the richest nation in the world, the United States. Why are so many children hungry and malnourished? Why are there such high rates of obesity and diabetes and heart disease? Why do we have such poor academic achievement in our schools? Why is that? Well, I'll tell you why. It's food apartheid. It's not a secret. We all see it happening. We all know what's going on, and it needs to stop. And so I don't know where you live. I don't know where you're from hearing this. If you're from the United States, just look around. Look around in your city. Look around in your state and see what kind of food systems are operating and pinpoint the instances of apartheid that you're seeing in those areas. If you live in a different country that's developed, that's calling itself, an advanced nation, look at the food system. Look at the availability of fresh food, of vegetables, of all those things in your area, and ask yourself if it's true that your country, your advanced, your developed, your prosperous nation is supporting and providing for the people that live there the way that they should. Ask the question. Look around. And if the answer is, I'm not sure, well, then it's time for action. It's time to bring attention to the issue wherever you're from, wherever you live. And it's time to call on people to make changes, to hold people accountable, hold city councils accountable, hold decision makers accountable, hold people accountable for perpetuating this food apartheid system that is so destructive and so harmful, particularly to communities of color, particularly to Black people in this country, but to everyone all around the world. It's a big problem. And so I don't really know what to tell you at this point because there's so many different issues and so many different ways in which we can have our voices be heard and make a difference. Whatever moves you, do that. I'm a professor, so I do a lot of research, a lot of writing, a lot of speaking about this issue and partnering with organizations that are seeking to resolve the gaps in our food systems. And so I'm doing my best. So whatever you can do, whether you just post something online, whether you go to a community meeting, whether you serve at a food pantry or a food bank, whatever you can do, let's work to get this apartheid system dismantled and to get people the food that everyone has a right to have. Food is a right. It's not a privilege. It's a right that should be available to each and every person in each and every family, no matter what. No matter what. And that's our episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Environmental Justice Lab, where we are for the people and for the planet. I will see you next time.